The first law struck like a fist. Fire ate the ridge and the sky went black. Ash fell in sheets as the valley shuddered. Lena said, "Run." The wind changed, and heat snapped like a snare. Kestrel watched from the basalt shelf, pupils wide. Smoke pressed low and turned breath into needles. A thunder of hooves rolled from the west. Rook cut across the creek bed, lips peeled, eyes fixed. Ash, small and shaking, lagged by the burned pine. Mara shouldered forward, ribs stark under her coat. The herd broke and dust climbed like ghosts. Sparks leapt and died on wet stones. Lena said, "Stay with me." The slope cracked and a cedar folded into flame. Kestrel slid down, silent, hunger taut as wire. The wind roared, and the world narrowed to heat and motion. Rook snapped at a flank, then vanished in smoke. Mara barked once, a warning bell in the storm. The ground trembled, and the creek hissed with cinders. Ash stumbled, then rose as ash flakes streaked his muzzle. Lena said, "Do not look back." The valley exhaled, and everything ran. The ridge groaned, as roots burned underground. Lena led the line along the creek's dark ribbon. Ash stumbled and shook soot from his whiskers. Mara said, "Keep close." Kestrel paced on the far bank, shadow threaded through steam. The herd's rumble faded, replaced by crackle and hiss. Rook circled wide, mapping every weak step. The wind dropped, and the silence felt wrong. A gust returned, hotter, heavier, carrying the bitter of resin. Lena tested the gravel, then chose the narrow cut. Ash peered into the slot, trembling but willing. Mara pressed her shoulder against his flank. Kestrel paused, calculating the choke point. Rook tasted the air and smiled without joy. The slope above shed stones that skipped like warnings. Lena said, "Now." They slipped into the cleft as sparks combed their backs. The world narrowed to rock, heat, and breath. The cleft funneled heat like a kiln. Stone pressed close, and the creek thinned to whispers. Ash coughed, then steadied. Mara said, "Breathe slow." Lena counted heartbeats and listened for hooves. None came. Only the fire's low animal growl remained. Kestrel's steps scratched rock above the slot. Rook's breath skimmed the smoke like a blade. A gust shoved embers through the passage and painted the walls. Ash flinched, then matched Lena's pace. Mara moved behind, anchoring the line. The cut bent left and opened to a bench of black sand. The sky flashed ember orange and then dimmed. Kestrel's tail marked a patient arc on the ledge. Rook held still, a dark punctuation outside the light. Lena said, "Cross there." The creek split the bench with a thin, bright seam. The bench cracked beneath the crusted ash. Steam rose in pulses from the creek's skin. Lena tested the ford with a forepaw. The current slid cold against heat. Ash hesitated at the sheen, then followed. Mara said one at a time. Kestrel paced the rim, reading the crossing. Rook drifted closer, silent as falling soot. A sap burst popped like a shot on the ridge. The sound sent Ash forward too fast. He slipped and splashed, then scrambled up with a gasp. Lena blocked the downstream edge with her chest. Mara steadied from behind. Kestrel froze, eyes narrowing, measuring mistakes. Rook's outline sharpened as the smoke thinned. The fire rolled a new tongue along the far slope. Lena said, "Moo." They climbed the slick bank, dripping on black glass pebbles. The far bank opened to a slope, studded with char and bone-white trunks. Wind shifted, and the fire whispered nearer. Lena scanned for a path without tinder. Ash panted, chest rattling light and fast. Mara said short climbs, then rest. Kestrel vanished and reappeared, a quiet orbit above. Rook angled low, choosing the shadow seam. The slope hummed with hidden cracklings. A raven fell silent, and the air felt emptied. Lena chose a traverse beneath a shale lip. Wow! Stones slid and sang as they moved. Ash steadied his feet and matched the rhythm. Mara kept her flank against his side. Kestrel paused, then turned upslope, reading a faster route. Rook quickened, closing the angle. Lena said, "Hold the line." The fire exhaled again, and the sky darkened further. The slope leveled into a hollow shielded by blackened trunks. Lena slowed her pace and let her breath ease. Ash pressed close, trembling, his ears pinned flat. Mara said, "He is stronger than he looks." Kestrel's silhouette lingered high, tail twitching once before melting back. Rook's shape dissolved into smoke, but his scent lingered sharp. The fire's roar dulled behind stone ridges, leaving only the rasp of settling embers. Ash tested the ground, paw trembling, and looked to Lena for a sign. She nudged him forward and whispered through her teeth, "Stay with me." The hollow smelled of damp moss beneath the ash crust, a fleeting reprieve. Mara leaned on her side, weary yet unbroken. Kestrel's eyes flared briefly from above, a warning kept in silence. Ash's gaze fixed on Lena, hope fragile but lit. For the first time, fear bent into trust. Ash shifted his paws as the hollow grew quiet. The silence pressed heavier than the fire. Lena said, "Listen." A faint drip echoed from a hidden seep. Mara rose and angled her nose, searching for cool. Ash followed the gesture and nosed the damp stone. His tongue found moisture between cracks. Relief softened his frame. Kestrel crouched on the ridge, eyes reflecting dull ember light. Rook traced the slope with patient circles, waiting. The hollow held breath, every sound sharp. Lena guided Ash back to her side. Mara said, "Not long here." The air carried the heat's promise of return. Ash leaned into Lena's leg, trusting her strength. For a moment, they stood still as stone, bound by breath and heartbeat. The seep widened into a trickle and carved a narrow line of mud. Ash lapped eagerly, leaving streaks on his muzzle. Lena said, "Slow." He obeyed, though thirst pulled at him. Mara watched, chest rising deep, holding her own hunger. Kestrel shifted above, tail curling with patience. Rook pressed closer, his outline forming between the trunks. The earth sighed under the fire's weight, cracks echoing through stone. Ash lifted his head, eyes bright, water marking his chin. Lena pressed her nose against him, reassurance without words. Mara's eyes softened, relief mixed with sorrow. Kestrel's claws scraped rock, the sound like a warning. Rook froze, ears cut forward, eyes locked on the group. The hollow became a stage of stillness, every figure bound by fragile balance. Ash wavered on tired legs but did not fall. His chest shivered, then steadied as Lena brushed past to lead. Mara stepped behind, every stride deliberate. The fire muted further, distance granting breath. Kestrel did not strike, she measured. Rook drifted closer, slow as dusk. Lena said, "We go east." Ash blinked at her, fear softened by resolve. His paws left prints darker than soot on the damp soil. Mara's head lifted, ears chasing faint wind from a cooler place. Kestrel crouched lower, eyes narrowed. Rook's shoulders shifted, hunger in restraint. The hollow exhaled smoke, and the world felt thin. Ash leaned toward Lena, step by step. The bond between them, fragile yet fierce, carried weight heavier than fire. The hollow opened toward broken stone ridges, jagged and waiting. Lena paused to measure the climb. Ash pressed against her flank, eyes weary but lit with stubborn fire. Mara said he can make it. Kestrel lingered, tail twitching, patient. Rook carved a slow arc, shadow tightening its circle. The air cooled with a shift of wind. Ash tested the rock, paws slipping but correcting. Lena leaned close, guiding him higher. Mara braced from below, steady as roots. Kestrel narrowed her gaze, silent and sharp. Rook's growl floated low, a threat carved in smoke. Ash lifted again, step by step, teeth clenched, breath fast. Lena's eyes held steady, anchoring his every move. Together, they climbed. The ridge accepted them, but shadows followed. Night did not cool the fire. It only hid its teeth. The ridge breathed sparks and the wind learned new cruelties. Lena took the narrow spine where shale sliced at her pads. Ash wobbled, but set his jaw. Mara said, "Count your steps." Kestrel traced the upper dark like a thought that would not leave. Rook slid below, pacing the slope with a patience that hurt. Hunger pressed as hard as heat. The creek was now a rumor behind stone. A gust shoved smoke across the path and erased edges. Lena paused and listened for the valley's pulse. It beat wild and far away. Ash coughed and steadied on her shoulder. Mara moved to block the drop. Kestrel's eyes flared and went dim as she chose her angle. Rook lifted his head and tasted ash for weakness. Lena said, "We climb or burn." The rock gave nothing, so they gave more. The spine broke into a field of shattered plates. Every step clinked a warning. Ash slipped and scraped a paw. He swallowed the yelp and kept moving. Mara said, "Good." Lena searched for a seam through the wreckage. Kestrel halted on a boulder, tail low, gaze calculating. Rook circled downwind, and the smoke carried his shape in pieces. Heat rose from the stone like breath from a fevered chest. Ash blinked grit from his eyes and leaned closer. A red glow crawled along the lower slope. It whispered of time running thin. Lena eased them toward a shadowed gully. The gully promised shelter and ambush in the same breath. Kestrel melted from the rock and vanished toward its mouth. Rook stopped, head high, listening to their choice. Lena said together. The plate sang again, softer, as if the hill approved. The gully narrowed to walls that kissed. Sound thickened. Air throbbed with trapped heat. Ash faltered at a choke of thorns. Lena pushed through and cleared a path with her chest. Mara said one breath, "Then go." Kestrel waited above the choke, eyes bright as coals. Rook's footfalls stopped. Silence sharpened to a blade. A pebble fell and tapped across rock like a countdown. Ash tucked his tail and slipped the thorns. The gully opened to a bowl of black sand and moon-sick light. The bowl offered room to run, and nowhere to hide. Kestrel's whiskers twitched as she weighed the leap. Rook entered at the far lip and held the bowl in his gaze. Lena said, "Stay behind me." The sand sagged under their weight, like a lie ready to break. The sand shifted, as if it breathed back. A crust broke and a sink started to take Ash. He sank to the wrist and thrashed small arcs. Lena lunged and pressed chest to chest to lift him free. Mara said, "Lift with the slope." Together they slid toward firmer grit. Kestrel's shadow stretched long as she moved along the rim. Rook descended 3 steps and stopped, savoring their struggle. Heat rode the wind and slashed the bowl with sparks. Ash found ground and planted wide. He shook and ash fogged the air. Lena stood between him and Rook and set her feet. Mara took the flank and kept the slope to her shoulder. Kestrel's tail drew a slow line like a fuse. Rook smiled with his eyes and waited for collapse. Lena said, "We move now." The bowl seemed to hold its breath. They sprinted for the exit cut where rock rose like broken teeth. The wind swung and poured smoke into the gap. Vision shrank to a narrow tunnel of gray. Ash coughed but kept pace with Lena's shoulder. Mara said, "Left wall." They brushed stone to keep the line. Kestrel flashed ahead as a quick flare of muscle and will. Rook accelerated and the ground answered with drumbeat thuds. A flaming snag toppled behind, sealing the bowl with sparks. Heat struck their backs as if to shove them faster. Ash stumbled on a root baked hard as bone. Lena caught him with a hip and drove them on. Mara's breath rasped but did not fail. Kestrel vanished through the cut, then turned to watch. Rook lunged and missed by a whisker of air. Lena said, "Up." They climbed into the dark throat of the hill. The cut bled into a plateau cracked like old skin. Smoke thinned, revealing stars twisted by heat shimmer. Lena stopped, chest heaving, ears straining. Ash collapsed beside her, ribs fluttering with panic. Mara said, "Let him breathe." Kestrel circled above the rim, her shadow painting arcs against ash-gray light. Rook prowled at the plateau's edge, slower, deliberate, a stalker with time on his side. The silence here was jagged, sharp enough to cut thought. Ash lifted his head and saw the sky bleed red behind flame-lit ridges. Lena said, "This land has no mercy." She looked back once at the fire and forward at shadows moving in the stone. The plateau carried the smell of char, but also something older, deeper, hidden beneath the ruin. Ash's eyes widened as his paws pressed into warm earth. The ground itself seemed alive. The earth trembled faintly, as if something deep below stirred. Lena pressed her nose to the stone and listened. Mara said, "This ground holds secrets." Ash blinked at her, unsure, but leaned close. Kestrel crouched and lowered her head, ears twisting. Rook paused and lifted his muzzle, suspicious of the shift. A fisher whispered warm air between the rocks. Ash shivered and pulled back, his eyes searching Lena for guidance. She said, "Not all enemies carried teeth." The fire's glow behind them dimmed as a cloud smothered it. Stars reappeared, their light caught in fractured stone. The plateau's surface traced patterns like scars of a long-forgotten wound. Mara pressed her paw against it and closed her eyes. Ash trembled again but steadied when Lena touched his shoulder. The truth hummed, patient, waiting to rise. The fissure widened with a sigh, releasing a gust heavy with sulfur and memory. Ash staggered back as sparks shot upward. "Mara," said, "the mountain remembers fire older than this blaze." Lena narrowed her eyes, seeing shapes carved into stone walls, marks left by those who once fled like them. Kestrel froze, tail stiff, her gaze sharp with unease. Rook snarled low, shaken for the first time. Ash pressed himself against Lena, voice trembling with breath. "It's alive." She licked his head and said, "Alive and ancient." The plateau no longer felt empty, but crowded with ghosts, each step echoing louder. Mara lifted her muzzle and howled once, not for fear but recognition. The sound carved into the cracks and came back deeper. Kestrel shifted back from the rim. Rook paced faster, uncertain. The truth had bared its face. The revelation split the night into before and after. The fire was no longer the only danger. The earth itself claimed its voice. Lena said, "This place will not hold us." Ash's legs wobbled, yet he stood straighter. Mara steadied him with her flank. Kestrel hissed and vanished into shadow, but her eyes glowed from a crevice. Rook barked sharp, frustration bleeding through his hunger. The plateau trembled again, ash fountains rising. Ancient echoes cracked the silence, reminders of extinction long past. Lena guided Ash to higher stone, each step resisting the quake. Mara's eyes held sorrow but also clarity. Kestrel did not attack, she watched the fault lines. Rook snarled louder, caught between rage and fear of what he could not hunt. Ash leaned against Lena's chest, trusting her against earth and shadow alike. The hidden truth uncoiled fully now. The plateau was not sanctuary, but a threshold. Ash understood in his bones, fear bending into awe. Lena said, "We walk where the old ones fell." Mara bowed her head, honoring the echo. Kestrel withdrew further, her hunger dulled by unease. Rook spat dust, furious at powers beyond his teeth. The stars above cleared, cold and merciless, their light sharp against the ash. Ash placed his paw on the cracked stone and did not flinch. His breath steadied, and his eyes glowed with reflection of embers. Lena touched her nose to his, sharing the weight. Mara said, "Carry it forward." The plateau hummed, deeper and endless. Shadows shifted not from flame, but from memory alive. Together they stood, small against ancient fire, yet bound tighter than before. The plateau split behind them with a roar, shoving firelight into the sky. Lena sprinted across jagged stone, lungs ragged, eyes blazing. Ash stumbled but forced his legs to answer. Mara said, "Hold fast." Sparks rained in spirals, the earth hammering their ribs. Kestrel leapt from the ridge and cut across their path, a silent blade of muscle. Rook surged from smoke, jaws wide, his growl rolling thunder. The world narrowed to speed, breath, and the raw cut of survival. Ash cried out as a stone sliced his pad, but he pushed forward, refusing collapse. Lena threw her body against Kestrel, teeth snapping. Mara spun to block Rook, fur bristling, eyes like coals. The firestorm bent closer, dragging their fight into its furnace. Lena said, "No turning back." The climax struck like lightning, unrelenting. The fire carried their battle into chaos. Kestrel struck first, claws flashing, but Lena met her with fury. Their bodies collided, rolling in ash, teeth carving sparks. Mara shoved Ash forward, barking once, sharp and final. Rook lunged from the flank, eyes mad with hunger. Ash stumbled, caught between terror and the will to endure. Lena tore free from Kestrel's grasp, her muzzle streaked with blood, and blocked Rook's charge. Mara rammed her flank into his ribs, shaking the ground. Ash scrambled toward a dark cut between rocks. The fire chased their shadows with hungry fingers. Lena said, "Run." Her voice was breath and command, breaking through fear. Kestrel rose again, crouched for another strike, her eyes lit by fire. Rook spat ash and pressed harder. The fight had only begun. The chase twisted through the rocks, each corner sharper than the last. Ash gasped, his breath short, his steps fueled by Lena's echo. Mara staggered but held her line, pressing her body between death and the pup. Rook snapped close enough for his breath to scorch their fur. Kestrel darted above, leaping ledge to ledge, shadow weaving. Lena drove forward, muscles burning, eyes locked on Ash. She said, "You are the fire's answer." The words struck like stone in the chest. Ash stumbled, rose and pushed harder, paws red but steady. Mara's flanks bled, yet she snarled, refusing to fall. Kestrel dropped down again, claws grazing stone, her tail slashing. Rook roared and lunged at Mara, fury desperate. Lena veered to strike his jaw with hers. The valley shook with their collision. Mara faltered, her chest rattling, but she stood again. Her body became a wall, unyielding. Rook slammed into her, teeth sinking deep. She cried out once but did not fall. Ash shrieked and turned back, but Lena shoved him forward, her eyes fierce with command. Mara's legs buckled, yet her jaws locked on Rook's throat, dragging him down. Kestrel circled, uncertain for the first time, tail twitching with hesitation. Flames swept closer, the air blistering with heat. Mara's breath rattled, her eyes dimming, but her grip held. Lena said, "Go, Ash." Her voice broke and hardened at once. Ash ran, tears lost in ashfall. Kestrel growled, but did not strike. Rook thrashed in rage, teeth and blood mixing. Mara's sacrifice burned brighter than the fire. The cost had been claimed. The climax roared, merciless. Mara's body finally sagged, her weight dragging Rook down. His fury bent into silence, as blood drowned his breath. Lena howled once, a sound carved from grief and defiance. Ash stumbled into open ground, chest heaving, his small form trembling against the scale of ruin. Kestrel stood frozen, her hunger quenched by the weight of loss. The fire raged louder, swallowing sky and stone, yet it felt quiet around Mara's fallen form. Lena ran to Ash and pressed her body against his, shaking but unbroken. She said, "She carried us here." Ash sobbed in silence, his eyes wide with pain and awe. Rook lay still, his shadow undone. Kestrel turned away, eyes dim and melted back into smoke. The climax ended not in triumph, but in the raw ache of survival. The firestorm waned, leaving silence sharp as glass. Lena stood trembling, fur scorched, eyes hollow. Ash pressed against her, his body still shaking from the flight. Mara lay behind, still and eternal. Smoke thinned, and revealed the bruised sky. Kestrel lingered at the edge of the ruin, her gaze unreadable. She did not strike, did not move closer, but watched. Lena said, "She carried us through." Ash whimpered, his head buried in her chest. The world smelled of ash, blood, and finality. Stones cracked under the weight of cooling air. The fire was gone but left scars too deep to fade. The silence felt heavier than the roar before. Kestrel's shadow slipped into the fog, leaving them alone. Ash lifted his head and whispered through breath, "We are still here." Lena exhaled, neither victory nor loss, only inevitability. The morning light broke through ash clouds in weak streaks. Lena guided Ash toward higher ground, paws dragging but steady. Behind them, Mara's body lay against stone, unclaimed, sacred. Ash stopped, looked back, his eyes wide with sorrow. Lena nudged him forward and said, "Her spirit walks with us." His breath shuddered, but he obeyed. The valley below smoldered, stripped to bone. Every tree was a silhouette, every shadow longer than it should be. Kestrel's presence was gone, but her memory burned. Ash limped, paw raw, but each step carried weight heavier than hunger. The silence pressed harder than any predator. Lena scanned the horizon, seeing nothing but ruin, yet she walked. Ash followed close, tethered by her will. The fire had taken, the earth had judged, and survival was its verdict. The climb grew steeper, shale sliding underfoot. Ash stumbled often but refused to cry out. Lena slowed her pace, keeping him close to her flank. The sky above cleared, blue cut with gray scars. Smoke rose in slow coils, fading into silence. Ash whispered, "It hurts." Lena pressed her muzzle to his head and answered, "Pain means you are alive." Mara's absence weighed heavy in her tone. The mountain carried their scent upward, fragile yet unbroken. No enemies stalked them now, only echoes. The fire's roar had been replaced by wind through stone. Ash set his jaw and lifted his paw again. Step by step, he climbed. Lena's eyes carried both grief and iron. The mountain accepted them, not as victors, but as remnants. The path ahead held nothing promised, only survival's narrow thread. At the ridge crest, the world opened wide. Below lay valleys hollowed by flame, rivers thinned to ash trails, forests gone to bone. Lena stood silent, eyes reflecting ruin. Ash pressed against her leg, his chest still rattling. Mara's voice seemed to echo in the wind, a reminder carried forward. Lena said, "What is gone remains inside us." Ash swallowed hard and looked down at the broken earth. A hawk circled overhead, sharp and distant, its cry cutting the silence. Kestrel's shadow no longer followed, but her memory lurked like smoke. Rook lay dead in the ashes below, unseen but not forgotten. The ridge carried both loss and survival, equal in measure. Ash leaned into Lena, fragile yet enduring. Together, they faced the vast silence. The fire had ended, but its scars would speak forever. Evening returned, softer, touched with pale gold. Lena and Ash rested on stone, warmed by dying sun. Their breaths slowed, no longer frantic, but weary. Ash closed his eyes and whispered, "She saved me." Lena pressed her muzzle against him and said, "She saved us all." Silence settled, but no longer felt cruel. The wind carried the scent of new growth hidden under ash. Somewhere far off, a stream whispered, its song faint but real. Mara's sacrifice bound them tighter, her presence etched into every step forward. Kestrel had retreated into darkness, her hunger unanswered. Rook's shadow was gone, swallowed by fire and blood. Ash lifted his head, eyes reflecting the fading sun, and breathed steady. Lena curled closer, her chest heavy yet proud. They had endured. Survival was not victory. It was memory, grief, and hope bound in one. The night stretched long and empty, stars cutting through ash-thin clouds. Lena lay beside Ash on a ridge of cold stone. The fire's glow was gone, leaving only silence and shadow. Ash whispered, "I hear her still." Lena pressed her head against his, steadying him. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine, fragile but alive. Mara's absence burned like a hollow, yet her spirit breathed in every heartbeat. Lena said, "She walks with us always." The land below glimmered faint with embers, a graveyard, and a promise together. Ash closed his eyes and leaned against her, exhaustion fading into fragile peace. Dawn bled across the horizon, soft gold spilling over blackened hills. Lena rose first, her body weary but unbroken. Ash lifted his head slowly, blinking at the light. He whispered, "The fire is gone." Lena answered, "But its mark stays." They stood together, shadows stretched long across the ridge. The land was scarred but breathing. Thin mist curled over the valley floor, hiding its ruin in a veil of gentleness. For the first time, the world felt quiet without menace. Ash pressed close, his trust steady. Lena lowered her head and guided him toward the new day. They followed the ridge down into silence, broken only by distant crows. The ground bore scars of fire, but green threads pierced through ash. Ash paused, paw on a sprout trembling in the breeze. His eyes widened at the fragile color. Lena said, "Life endures." Her voice carried weight, firm yet tender. Ash leaned forward, nose brushing the leaf, and breathed deeply. The wind hummed low, carrying hints of new growth hidden in ruin. Mara's sacrifice echoed in the small sprout, proof that death fed survival. Together, they stepped onward, not just fleeing, but returning to what could be rebuilt. The valley stretched wide, a graveyard and cradle both. Bones of trees clawed at the sky, but water glimmered where streams rekindled their song. Lena led slowly, paws cautious, ears high. Ash followed, steps steady, no longer trembling. He said, "The fire could not take it all." She turned her head, her eyes soft, and answered, "Nothing takes everything." The air smelled cleaner, carrying the first scent of moss. Birds called faint, their cries sharp against silence. Ash's tail lifted a fraction, hope breaking through grief. Together, they entered the valley not as fugitives, but as survivors tethered by loss and resilience. Evening came with stillness, the sky painted crimson and violet. Lena and Ash stood at a high ridge, the horizon endless. Ash pressed his paw against hers, small but steady. Lena lowered her head, her eyes reflecting fading light. She said, "This is where we remain." The silence carried Mara's howl, faint and eternal, carved into memory. Ash looked out, eyes wide, and whispered, "We live." The world below smoldered, but stars pierced the darkening sky with fierce brightness. The last image etched itself clear, two survivors framed against ruin, their bond unbroken. The echo would last beyond fire, beyond night, forever.